listening to the Blue Raider Podcast, presented by Gold's Gym of Tennessee. Your all-access pass to everything Middle Tennessee sports, game recaps, player spotlights, and the latest from the heart of Blue Raider Nation. Now, here's your host, Jake Bolden.
Welcome back into the Blue Raider Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Bolden. Today's episode, we're going to be meshing between behind enemy lines in our typical weekly preview as we prepare for another Conference USA midweek clash where the Blue Raiders will travel north up to Delaware, CUSA newcomers, and hopefully ride a wave to get us back to bowl eligibility. As Derek Mason alluded to in this week's press conference, you're not going to want to miss this conversation with our friends over at Feathers and Field Goal Podcast. But before we get into that, let's thank today's sponsor. Before we get into the episode, I need to thank our sponsor. Gold's Gym has been the mecca of fitness since 1965, and to celebrate their 60-year anniversary right now, you can get a month-to-month membership for just $19.65 bi-weekly. That's no commitment, full access to all 16 Gold's Gym Tennessee locations, and top-tier equipment to help you level up your fitness no matter your sport. But here's the deal. This offer is only available online and it ends when the summer does. So don't wait. Go to goldsgym.com and lock it in today. Gold's Gym Tennessee. Train like a legend. No strings attached. Now, let's get back to the episode. Joining us now on the Blue Raider Podcast, he is co-host of the Feathers and Field Goal Podcast, one of our friends at Conference USA Podcast Roundtable. It is Daniel Steenkamer. Daniel, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Jake, for the opportunity. This is going to be a lot of fun, just seeing the different guest segments you've had over time. Excited to have a chance to be a part of it.
Well, I'm excited to have you on my show now, and I've had you and Bryce both at separate occasions on the round table, and I'll save my plug for that later, but happy to have you on. Us both are excited for basketball season for a lot of reasons, but we're still in the heat of football season, actually past the midway point. And as I said there in the intro, Derek Mason is looking to get the Blue Raiders to bowl eligibility. He hasn't quite sailed that one in yet, and it's going to be a tough task for the Blue Raiders as they travel up north to Delaware. That is at 6:30 local Central Time, 7:30 Eastern there in Delaware. First off, as someone that this is new territory, literally, for the Blue Raiders to go this far north this late in the year. What's the weather like? Is that something that Blue Raider fans should be concerned about?
I wouldn't be concerned coming from a Middle Tennessee perspective, traveling this time of year to Newark. It's been mild early in the football season. It's been comfortable, like late summer type temperatures, I would say. And then lately you get later at night, it's been more autumnal and cool, and those cooler temps that are more in the 50s and trending toward the 40s eventually. But I'm expecting for Wednesday night, it'll just be a pretty mild, like 60s, 50s type atmosphere earlier in the day with the sun out. Hopefully the sun's out, looking at probably in the 60s, and then you get into the 50s for the evening. So not expecting it to be overly windy either. I was checking on the wind actually in the forecast, because there are times where you get later in the season and it gets blustery, and there's really like a wind tunnel that sometimes can form at Delaware Stadium with the agriculture campus nearby, neighboring the athletic complex. It sometimes feels like you just get like a stream of wind that's not obstructed by really many buildings before you get to the football stadium. So that doesn't expect to be the case on Wednesday night, which will be nice. So no, it should be quite comfortable for mid-October football.
Here in Murfreesboro, we just had rain over the weekend, a relatively bad storm, and it has cooled off since. And I'm telling you this because it's in the 60s here, and I absolutely hate it. It's been 80s, 70s until now, and so I don't look forward to it getting 60s and now cooler as we get closer and closer to Thanksgiving. But it's new. Again, we don't go this far north. Prior to this, it was Lynchburg, Virginia, and even Lynchburg isn't the northern as it gets when you're talking about Delaware. So well, let's reflect on this game a little bit from a Blue Raiders perspective. Both of these teams are coming off of, I would say, performances that they would love to forget. Blue Raiders blew a second half lead to Missouri State, missed a field goal on a walk-off opportunity to win the game. Delaware, last time out, they were against Jacksonville State, really on national television, kind of just laid an egg. Jacksonville State played their brand of football on offense like we all thought, but really it was which Jacksonville defense were you going to get? And they came out and really shut the door on the Blue Hens. So from your perspective, I guess you've had enough time to prepare for this game in particular. It's just time to get that bad taste out of your mouth.
It is, and for Delaware to be back at home, even though it's on another Wednesday, which around here, ton of conversation about getting used to a weekday game flow. I think there is some sense that it could be a help to have now, okay, precisely 1 week between games. You had Wednesday at Jacksonville State and now another Wednesday against Middle Tennessee. It's at least a 7-day schedule that you can kind of be familiar with and be used to, even though the ultimate end game is playing on Wednesday, because folks are looking for answers as to how Delaware didn't look ready to go in a number of ways on offense, didn't have the momentum, didn't have that flow. Saw early on even an early flag that set Delaware back from having a nice gain that could jumpstart a drive. Things like that, whether it's penalties, fumbles that were forced by Jacksonville State, most importantly, that led to Delaware playing from catch-up and playing from behind for the entire night, feeding right into Jacksonville State's hands and being a team that runs the ball and can work the clock and can get comfortable playing its style of offense that it's developed over the course of the season. You see a Jacksonville State team that Ryan Carty, head coach for Delaware, has said is really refined and found its identity. So Delaware ran into that type of saw, and the Blue Hens were turned away on the road. So getting home against Middle Tennessee is an important factor here, protecting home turf. Running the ball, though, when you actually get down to the nitty-gritty, Delaware only 34 rushing yards on 22 attempts at Jacksonville State. That's not anywhere near what you need to do to make Nick Minicucci in a situation where at quarterback for Delaware, Minicucci can be the distributor, sling it around. Certainly, Delaware likes to sling it around the yard, but have an evenly distributed passing game where a bunch of different pass catchers are getting involved, and you don't know which target is going where next because so many different receivers and tight ends can enjoy the spread of the wealth. If you're trailing the way Delaware was at Jacksonville State, it starts to become needing chunks even more. So maybe certain receivers are being targeted more than others, or you just can't find answers at times when you're that predictable or one-dimensional, regardless of how many different receivers you rotate into the game. Delaware does like playing a bunch of different pass catchers and giving them snaps, and Delaware does think it's deep in that category, but it doesn't much matter if you're that caught up in playing from behind and one-dimensionally. So Delaware will look to embrace being back at home and embrace running the football with Joe Silver, Vyron Ellison at running back, and Nick Minicucci at times in the red zone with the quarterback option to run the ball as well. So I think those are some of the factors that really come into play for Delaware, being back at home, being in a weekly schedule, 1 week between the last game and coming into this one, and looking to get back to being the type of team that can do it both, run the ball and pass the ball, starting up front with Delaware's experienced offensive line, setting things up for Silver and Ellison. And they didn't have many chances against that Jacksonville State front seven.
And I want to build off that. From the Blue Raiders perspective, looking at the front seven, that's something that we've kind of hung our hat on this year. Is this unit is very, very good. And when I watched back that Jacksonville State game, you talked about how one-dimensional this offense became because they weren't able to move the ball on the ground. And from a Blue Raiders perspective, I like the potential to do that. Now, getting so much time in between those games, maybe Delaware is able to iron out some of those details that maybe they weren't prepared in that Jacksonville State game. And you put it probably a little bit more nicer, but it felt like Delaware just kind of sleptwalked through that first portion of that game where I think MTSU, if Delaware falls into that lull again, that's where they have to capitalize. But where this game scares me the most is the ability of this Blue Hens offense to move the ball through the air. Minicucci, you guys have kind of stumbled into this top CUSA quarterback who throws it, like you said, around the yard, got many weapons that makes this team dangerous because they are the top passing offense in Conference USA. But if you can make this team one-dimensional, I guess maybe that's something Jack State had figured out and kind of flipped that on its head, because if you had told me Delaware can't run the football, I would say they're going to be fine. But we saw how that wasn't the case against Jacksonville State. So I'm going to turn this back to you. As a Blue Raider fan, I like to think if we can stymie the run, force them to pass, maybe we find ourselves into a situation where this becomes a low-scoring ball game. But we've seen Delaware at times where with that passing game gets going, you can't slow them down. So do you fear that if that happens again, the run game doesn't get going, that Delaware hopefully has figured out how this offense needs to run if they become one-dimensional again?
It would be a concern if Delaware is backed into a corner, it feels like offensively again, and has to put so much on Nick Minicucci's shoulders at quarterback. I do think Nick Minicucci plays well at home and responds to adversity well at home and can be the quarterback to lead Delaware from a deficit or from adverse conditions at home. against Middle Tennessee. But it would be far from ideal from a Delaware perspective if the Blue Hens are, like I said, backed into that corner, feeling like it's a skewed game script where Delaware is needing to throw it on first and second down a little bit disproportionately, just because Jacksonville State did put things on video where you can see where Delaware may have trouble finding separation in the receiver game, where Delaware may have problems in creating short intermediate options for Nick Minicucci before a defense later in the game might play a bit softer and preventative. And Delaware against Jacksonville State took some more passing yards and beefed up its passing numbers later in the ball game against the Gamecocks. So I think Delaware, it really is mission critical to avoid becoming out of character pass happy, because there's a pass happy that's in rhythm for Delaware where the Blue Hens are kind of in control, in command of a game, having the feel of the game in their corner, and they can kind of pass it, not at will, but with a lot of confidence that Nick Minicucci is taking care of the ball and not coughing it up to the other team. If it's a situation that resembles Jacksonville State game where Delaware is having to pass it out of necessity and not out of taking what the defense is giving Delaware and catching the defense off guard and giving the defense problems and keeping track of Kyrie Duplessis, Jake Thal, and others at receiver, if it's passing out of necessity, then Delaware is going to feel the pressure because being at home, the folks who turn out to this Wednesday night game, which is unprecedented at UD, the people who turn out on this Wednesday night are diehards for sure. I don't know what the turnout's going to be, but Delaware has been building for this and marketing this and planning for this, but you don't know what the home game atmosphere is going to look like, I think, at all. I just don't know what to expect. So those who do turn out on Wednesday are going to be some of those diehards for sure. The loyalist people have been with Delaware for years. It's harder to get a walk-up type of crowd on Wednesday, right? So the people who are seeing Delaware on Wednesday are going to be the ones who are going to be at times maybe not in favor of the alternate helmet that Delaware is going to roll out against Middle Tennessee. The all-black uniform, new-looking alternate uniform. It's just a lot of pressure on Delaware to follow through at home and make those new uniforms look good and not create another area of concern for fans who already are probably pretty skeptical of Delaware's new look for the blackout on Wednesday. So all these things start to factor in, I think. It sounds like a crazy ramble on my part, but I think it's all part of the picture for Delaware where there is pressure involved. You're at home. You're trying to make these new uniforms look good. You're on ESPN2. It's the best home game platform you've had so far this year. And on paper, Middle Tennessee comes in trailing in the standings. So Delaware trying to protect its position there. These are all things that are at play and maybe not on the mind of the offense, but part of the pressure that's on this offense to avoid being put in the position of having to throw the ball a ton in the second half.
A big storyline for the Blue Raiders is that defensive secondary and how healthy that they will be. We're still hoping for Trayvon Farrell. Unfortunately, you and I will not have the luxury of knowing. I know that CUSA is rolling out the availability reports, but I don't get them until 30 minutes before kickoff. So I'm not able to really accurately prepare. But if Trayvon Farrell comes back, that's going to help the secondary. But we saw a few guys in the Missouri State game, freshmen, to actually get some reps. So I don't know the situation about what this defensive backfield is going to look like in preparation for this Delaware game. But what does scare me, and you touched on it there, is Kyrie Duplessis and Jake Thaw. For only the second time this season, the Blue Raiders are going to be facing a wide receiver that's better than our very own Najee Cox and Cam Lacey. Of course, I'm looking back at Gabe Binyard at Kennesaw State, who had a field day with the Blue Raiders secondary. So now you have two weapons that Minicucci has to throw to in Duplessis and Jake Thaw. So something to really keep an eye on there is what does a new look secondary potentially look like against two of the top 6 wide receivers in Conference USA. But Dan, I want to flip this over to the defensive side of the ball now. This is something that I know when I previewed this on your show. I feel when we're comparing apples to apples, I love MTSU's defense. I actually would put the front 7 up against anyone in Conference USA, although the scoreboard doesn't necessarily always show that. But what are your thoughts on Delaware's defensive side? Again, I know you guys have kind of a sour taste of what happened at Jack State, but as someone who can give you some solace that's had to play Jacksonville State for 2 years in a row, that offense, that's what happens to us all. Where they're going to run the foot. It's one of those things, Jack State's going to run the football. You're just going to have to limit that run, and something that Delaware wasn't able to do. So I guess back to that, my question for you, do you feel concern for the defense, or was that you just ran into the buzzsaw that is the Jack State running offense?
I think Delaware has actually lately trended more positively on defense than on offense. Similarly to your insights on Middle Tennessee, which we really appreciate having with your spot being guest over at Feds and Field Goals, the Delaware's defense has, since the start of conference play, taken it up a notch, and it just hasn't always come through in the final score. It seems like we're making excuses, maybe both of us, for respective defenses here. But in reality, it's just kind of peeling back the layers to this. And not all the outcomes are indicative of what each team has done on defense, which kind of feels like a common theme here. Looking at the thread of Delaware's defense, to open the year, Delaware didn't tackle well at all against Delaware State, the FCS opponent beginning the year. That was attributed locally to not maybe being as physical at the end of camp, trying to get healthier at the end of training camp, and winding up in a spot where Delaware State under Deshaun Jackson is much improved and is running the rock, kind of like an FCS version of Jacksonville State in the running game and those rush yards that Delaware State can accrue. But Delaware came out of that win over DSU not feeling very good about its defensive chops, tackling, and just being fundamentally ready to go and stymie a team in more clear fashion when Delaware's the favored team. Delaware's defense had breakdowns at Colorado that helped the Buffs pull away in that game, in Delaware's game that followed the DSU game. So you then go into a shootout Delaware had against UConn, where it wasn't as if the Delaware defense was bathing itself in glory against a really good UConn offense. It wound up being a shootout, Delaware winning an OT. But, okay, you hadn't seen Delaware's defense necessarily put it all the way together outside of a good stretch at Colorado where Delaware's defense kept the Blue Hens in the game. Since conference play, Delaware holds FIU to under 20 points on the road, and Delaware pulls away from FIU and it really dictates and controls that game in the second half. You see Delaware come home, face Western Kentucky. This was before Western Kentucky had its clunker against FIU, a Western Kentucky offense that has its reputation that Middle Tennessee fans certainly know about. And Western Kentucky scores only 20 points of offense against Delaware. It was that pick six and the PAT to follow that helps Western Kentucky get that 27-24 win over Delaware. And one of those Western Kentucky field goals in the ball game as well, a longer field goal that had a doink and then goes through against the Delaware defense. So tough breaks for Delaware's defense to wind up looking at 27 on the scoreboard by the Hilltoppers. But Delaware's defense doing enough to get Delaware a win against WKU, and it just wasn't to be. You see Delaware against Jacksonville State now most recently. Jacksonville State received short fields, or I should say a defensive touchdown that Jacksonville State scored on one of Delaware's fumbles, and then a shorter field earlier on off of a different Delaware fumble that really made it so that 14 points scored by Jacksonville State were hardly necessarily the defense's fault, quote unquote, on Delaware's end. So Delaware's defense was put in compromising situations against Jacksonville State multiple times. It's a defense that did hold Jacksonville State to 21 points in the first half. I say hold to because Jacksonville State was sort of spotted a quicker path to 14 points that didn't have that much to do with Delaware's defense by way of those Blue Hen fumbles. So Delaware's defense also held Jacksonville State initially in the third quarter, got a stop. Delaware has the ball down 21-6, and then Delaware's offense doesn't get that score that makes it a one-score game and kind of resets the game. You never saw that by Delaware offensively. So Delaware's defense, I think, has actually been let down a little bit by the surrounding complementary sides of the ball for Delaware. And so Delaware's defense has, I think, more to prove to have a complete game against Middle Tennessee and keep fighting the good fight to look for this offense to get back going at home. Because if that's the case, and Delaware's defense keeps up its recent trends that are underlying these final scores, then Delaware can kind of have that holistic success that would lead to a conference win.
You talked about both of these teams kind of having their own explanations as to why the defenses have looked the way that they have. And when you look at Conference USA only stats, Delaware is bottom half of scoring defense, but that doesn't necessarily paint a fair picture, because when you look at their body of picture, it's Jacksonville State, WKU, FIU. Well, two of those teams, Jacksonville State already is the number one offense in the conference, but WKU very quickly right behind them. And then FIU, I guess it depends on which FIU team you're going to get. Are you going to get the one that just beat WKU on the road last week? Are you going to get the one that just kind of stunk it up when they played Delaware? So I don't know. I don't know what FIU is right now. And last week just threw a bigger wrench into that. But I think this Delaware defense, if the and you put it eloquently, if the offense can stop putting them in compromised positions, I think Delaware has the ability to shine. Because I look at that Colorado game and think to myself, that's a pretty darn good defense. So maybe it's a matter of feeling their way through the season as well, because CUSA has been a totally different defensive outlook for the Blue Raiders as well. Something that, again, we find ourselves in the top half of scoring defense in Conference USA games only. You take out the 42 points against Wisconsin, even the 30 plus you gave up to Austin P. I think those are games that you would love to have back on the defensive side of the ball. But the defense, both of these offenses are still like they're both trending in different directions. I think you feel a little bit more pessimist than I feel optimistic about our offense, but it's a matter of, can our offense piece it together throughout this game? And then the defenses, I think, again, are trending in their own directions, but nuance is a better way of defining how those teams have gotten to where they are. But turnovers, I think that's a big one, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. We have to get into our segment here, sponsored by Trevor Haggard, because when life happens, just like interceptions, they're going to happen, but you're going to want someone in your corner who actually knows your name. And that's where Trevor Haggard of State Farm comes in. Whether it's protecting your car, your home, or your family's future, Trevor and his team are right here in Murfreesboro. They're ready to help. So don't just settle for some 1-800 number. Call a neighbor who cares. Call Trevor Haggard State Farm today at 615-203-5522, or visit their website at trevorismyagent.com and let them help you protect what matters most. Trevor Haggard, State Farm, like a good neighbor. State Farm is there. And Dan, normally I have these nice, pretty graphics to go along with this segment, but we're going to get into the keys of the game. So we've recapped and summarized all that right there with both of these teams and their storylines, but I want to hear from you on your perspective. What are the two keys to the game for the Blue Hens to come out victorious on Wednesday night?
Two keys to the game that I'll mention that are aside from discussion of the offensive rushing game that certainly we covered. I'm going to look on the defensive personnel, get into individuals. I think 4 keys to the game. Delaware's been without Dylan Traynor at linebacker in recent games due to apparent injury, or at minimum for whatever reason it has been. Dylan Traynor hasn't been available for Delaware at linebacker recently. And we've seen Blake Matthews at outside linebacker and Merge Malumba toward the interior, although they'll certainly move around in Delaware's 3-3-5. We've seen linebacker play step up for Delaware and be strong with Matthews and with Malumba. And that's encouraging for Delaware to pair those guys next to Gavin Mole at linebacker. It's been Gavin Mole and Dylan Traynor, the two best known Delaware linebackers. I mentioned linebackers in particular because it's a Delaware defense that is going to rely so much on the linebackers in the middle of the defense, behind the base 3-man defensive line front. How well do Delaware's linebackers get involved in occasional pressures and also manage the run fitting responsibilities when you're working with base 3 down linemen? How well do Delaware's linebackers back up that defensive line by definition and fit those areas? So that is one key I look at for Delaware is this defense that has to show patience and has to trust the process, have all these cliches at hand, because it could be easy to get a little bit frustrated, I think, for Delaware's defense when you look at, we're back on the field all of a sudden. How did this happen again with a fumble all of a sudden? It's a shocking feeling to have to pick up your helmet and get it all strapped up and trot back out there and go face Cam Cook again down at Jacksonville State. So if Delaware's defense can keep that belief in the Delaware offense and say, we know the Delaware offense wasn't playing its game, didn't have its night, and we know as a Delaware defense, we still showed up and we're going to pick them up and still believe that if we do our job, we're contributing toward a win. It's just that mental edge that Delaware can bring as a defense, and that can lead to certainly as well the physical results of that I think start at linebacker, with the leadership at linebacker, with the X's and O's, critical aspect of the linebacker play for Delaware. That's why I look at all those factors for Delaware as a key on defense. It's starting at linebacker, both in the leadership. Does Dylan Traynor get back with his leadership role, being back on the field, not just leadership on the sideline, but then in general, how Delaware's linebackers play to help bring the spirit of this Delaware defense up, despite recent tough outcomes against WKU and Jacksonville State. The other key for Delaware that I'll go back onto on offense is ball security. It's ball security. And you think about ball security sometimes, well, is it the quarterback or running back? The guys are getting hit in the backfield or getting it ripped at in the backfield. But no, at times in particular, it's ball security for Delaware lately in the pass catching game. And so you look at wide receivers and tight ends for Delaware having the wherewithal to finish the play and certainly have that heart. Delaware calls it heart, where the ball is the heart of the program, so to speak. And the heart is involved in terms of your coverage of the football and how you protect it. So That's just a slogan in the lingo, but it means a little bit more when you see ball security suffering for Delaware. It's not always, a player's carrying the ball like a loaf of bread. The defense is making plays too, and there's a rally to the football that's involved, and there's help defense and extra tacklers pursuing the play and making it a 2 versus 1 defender versus ball carrier situation. So those are parts where you credit the opposing team too. But at some point, Delaware's offensive skill talent, for lack of a better phrase, the skill players have to take it upon themselves to make the fumbles a thing of the past. And it's hard to ask for perfection, but it feels like there's a huge risk of, if Delaware puts it on the ground again against Middle Tennessee, there could be a mental factor at play too of, oh no, here we go again. I can't believe that happened. I let my team down. You worry about players at times getting caught up in that mentally and then starting to slow down their playing speed, or slow down how they can run their route or finish their route and all those things. So it's a weird balance, because this other key to the game of ball security, you wonder if it's extra hyped and extra zeroed in on. That's a good thing in that, yes, we're paying attention to it and we care about it. The other part of it is, if it's too much of a mental block and too much of all on your mind at once, does that affect how things play out in terms of, you sort of become a self-fulfilling prophecy. You create a situation where you're so worried about the ball and you're so focused on looking at the ball the whole time, all the way through. Are you distracted from the bigger picture at play here? Of course, the ball is the picture. The ball is the most important thing, but psyching yourself out and knowing it's a mental game is a factor, I think, as well. So keys to the game, and a ton of words all at one time. The Delaware's defensive leadership, hanging through these tough times at linebacker, maybe getting Dylan Trainer back, whether Trainer's in there at linebacker or not, having that solid linebacker play at the heart of the defense will be big. And then also on offense, securing the ball, because if Delaware does have to throw it a lot again, Delaware has a lot of guys who they trust to catch the ball and give Nick Minakuchi a good chance, but it's a matter of withstanding these big hits you're getting at the FBS level. These are some FBS teams that can rotate in defenders who are going to hit you hard all night. It's not quite like maybe the FCS rosters that might not have that same depth. These are defenses who can really make you feel it the whole night. So that's going to help inspire, I hope, Delaware to bring that renewed emphasis on ball security and withstand those kind of hits that you'll feel throughout the rest of the season.
2 keys for the Blue Raiders. The first one is boring. I'll get it out of the way, but this has got to happen. I've talked all season long about how good this front seven is. And so for that front seven, they have to generate pressure, make Minakuchi feel uncomfortable, because no matter who is at cornerback, if Trayvon Farrell is back or not, if we have to throw in some more younger guys that are receiving some experience or not, they're going to have a tough test. Unfortunately for those guys, we can't have them out on an island and having to defend those guys. So can the defensive line and the linebackers create enough pressure? Can Brian Stewart, Coach Mason drop enough pressure to give those guys an opportunity to defend for short, quick times? Because as you touched on earlier, at times the short, quick passing game has been an issue for Delaware. That situational play has been an issue. So can you put their offense behind the sticks with good defensive pressure? That will be a huge. The second one, something that is, if you've listened to the show, you've heard me say this all year long, and I'm going to continue this until it happens. The quick start has to happen for the Blue Raiders. We saw what happened against Kennesaw State, where you started slow, you started the game back 3 touchdowns, and if you take those out, you win the football game. If you have a good start, I'm not even saying you have to score 3 touchdowns, but start the game out of the first quarter within a touchdown score, like we saw with Missouri State, like we saw with Marshall, like we saw with Nevada. Those are all of our one possession games. That's not a coincidence, because you didn't come out the gates stuck in your tracks. If you can play a good first quarter, whether that's getting a quick field goal on your first drive like you did against Missouri State, and again, not giving up so many a big chunk plays like you did against Kennesaw, you give this team a chance. I don't expect this game to be high scoring by any stretch, but if you can get out of the first quarter in a 1-possession game, I feel comfortable, because like I said, I love the run that we have with Jaquil Middlebrooks and Ricky Hunt, and now DJ Taylor, the freshman that's getting some snaps. Now, if we can get into games where we can run the ball, we're not forced to throw on 3 straight plays and then punt, allow us to get deeper into that playbook that I know Bodie Reeder has, I feel good about it. And in situations where we've gone with the scripted playbook, that first possession, like we did at Missouri State, we scored on a field goal. In a lot of our scripted second half drives, they've come up with points. So I love where Bodie Reeder is able to draw up these scripted plays because it seems to be pretty efficient for us. So I don't want to see us forcefully get out of those scripted playbooks because we're so far behind on the early going. So again, in summary, great pressure at the defensive linebacker, get Minakuchi uncomfortable, and then start fast, and maybe not even start fast as not just start in the ball game. Don't put yourself behind so early that it no longer becomes a ball game and people are snoozing and tuning off on ESPN2. So that's a big part of it. But quickly, Dan, let's get into that X factor. Who is someone for the Blue Hens that needs to have a big game Wednesday night for Delaware to come up as a winner?
Who needs one blue hen to have a big game? The quarterback is too obvious an answer. That's the low-hanging fruit. I can't go there. We've covered Nick Minakuchi and how, yes, he has become that QB1. It wasn't necessarily planned that he'd be QB1, dating back to Zach Marker's injury for Delaware at quarterback in the season opener. The Minakuchi's experienced, and he only becomes more so now. But an X factor outside of the quarterback, I look at Delaware's receiving group, and one that hasn't found the end zone yet this year, but I think it's only a matter of time, and that is Sean Wilson at receiver for Delaware. No tutties somehow this year, and I'm not saying that as a criticism, but you still look at 24 receptions for Sean Wilson. That trails only Kyrie Duplessis in total receptions for Delaware so far this year. Wilson, I think, is a catalyst of Delaware's offense, who isn't as much of a vet, certainly, on this team, like a Jake Thaw or even Jakari Kelly, who's a slot option for Delaware as well. But Wilson is a player who I think has all the looks and all the traits of being a type of go-to receiver for Delaware going forward, so long as he can be retained. He's a player who just looks the part. He absolutely looks the part. He has shown a proclivity to early in ball games get Delaware's offense jump-started, maybe a key conversion on a third down earlier in a ball game that sets up a Delaware drive that gives confidence for the rest of the way, gives confidence in the game plan, just gives the momentum that can be such a real thing that you've talked about, Jake, for early in games and the way games start. So I think for Delaware, for as many players that Delaware does have options for on offense, if we're talking about Delaware having a type of, not saying get right game in a way to slight Middle Tennessee, but a needed get right moment. I mean, you're at home. Liberty is looming on the road again to follow. Delaware's trying to avoid a losing streak, becoming a real serious streak at 3 games. Delaware needing to have that kind of offensive night that we're more accustomed to seeing at home. Sean Wilson may well be a big part of that. I look to him, somebody I mentioned in preseason, as a breakout candidate type of player, and he has played well this season. But I think he'll rebound as well individually from a tough night in some respects that he did have at Jacksonville State, along with the rest of his offensive teammates. So one X factor I look at is Wilson at receiver.
DeMonte Smith. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that he was a second-team All-American midseason, second-team All-American as crowned this last week. It's been a while since we've had the show, so that's my real first opportunity to mention it. But that's my segue into him being our X factor for the Blue Raiders this week. It's the pressure wasn't there against Missouri State, who is one of the worst offensive lines in Conference USA, and he does create a lot of quarterback hurries, which unfortunately I don't know if this is an MTSU thing, but they don't track quarterback hurries. But DeMonte Smith is very capable of that. And I talk about one of my keys being creating pressure. And DeMonte Smith, you earned yourself a second-team All-American, rightfully earned. I think he is a great defensive tackle. But this week, you're going to have to earn your keep. I look to DeMonte to create a lot of pressure and, again, make this game something that the Blue Raiders can actually play themselves into on the offensive end. And that starts with a strong defense, holding a good Blue Hens offense stagnant with his efforts. So lastly, I'll paint a final picture for us. Wednesday night there in Newark. It is a 6:30 Central kickoff, 7:30 Eastern time. It is viewable on ESPN2. The Blue Hens opened as 10.5-point favorites, but that line has slowly trickled down to 8.5, so still favored by more than a touchdown and a 2-point conversion. The over-under, in my eyes, is surprisingly high at 55.5, but Dan, last question for you. How do you see this game playing out?
Delaware is coming off of a pair of games. The Blue Hens offense has left points on the field. Most recently, it was against Jacksonville State, including on 2-point conversion tries that Delaware didn't find success on that really helped halt any chance at Delaware momentum as well. So Delaware's offense feeling it this week. Is this going to be the week where you see Delaware cross 30 points again? I'm not sure it will be the week for Delaware to get back over 30 points on offense, but I don't think it has to be necessarily for Delaware to win the game against Middle Tennessee. I do like Delaware to win at home. If this game were on the road, a longer trip to an unfamiliar place once more in the league, it would be all the more dicey. But at home, Delaware needing to maybe bring its own energy on the sideline because, again, don't know exactly how this is going to play attendance-wise and turnout-wise on a Wednesday. Just don't have that proof of concept to see what it's going to look like. I like Delaware to bring in enough of its own juice and not have enough kick on offense to win this one in the final 27-23, but it's right around that one-score margin there, Jake, where I don't see Delaware doing anything to justify a situation where you can pick Delaware by multiple possessions, where you were talking about the spread. I just don't see the justification for that. I think there are defensive trends that suggest Delaware can do enough with 3 high safeties possibly to put a stop to Vadiato's top options in the passing game. But I don't think offensively Delaware has done enough of a breakthrough on finishing drives and finishing with points, even in those 2-point spots, just overcoming completions of drives at the very end, getting points on the board. Delaware hasn't done enough to give me the faith of multiple scores, but Delaware's back's a bit against the wall. The back's up against the wall now. All the momentum Delaware had early in the year has subsided. I think Delaware has to recapture that, and this is the one chance to do it before it becomes a bear once again in terms of going on the road. But Middle Tennessee is going to be just as motivated, I think, Jake. So I'm not overly ambitious, I don't think, with my prediction because it's been one where the version of Delaware that played against FIU is more and more in the past. So what are we going to see to where you might feel a little more bold on a take later on? But I don't feel that way right now.
I'm still leery. The one thing about MTSU that I have seen week after week is they are finding ways to lose games. And that is reason for concern when you're going on the road at Delaware, who, for all the reasons you listed, this is a game that they still want to win. And I know there are things on I see this all the time on my Twitter sphere or X, I guess I should be calling it, but Delaware, if they get to 6 wins, there is a world where they go to a bowl game because there's not enough 6-win eligible teams, and Missouri State's in that boat as well. So there is still incentive for Delaware to get to 6 wins. And when you look at their schedule, as you talked about, in my opinion, I think their hardest tests are beyond, they're past them now, and they are looking to an easier portion of the schedule. Liberty, I think this is the most beatable Liberty team we've seen in years, but you're still going on the road, and we saw what they were able to pull out of their hat against New Mexico State. They did not deserve to win that game, but they did, and that's what happens when you're on the road in a midweek CUSA game in Lynchburg. That brings me to this point. You're on the road in Delaware, a new environment. I think Delaware, I anticipate a good crowd. I think that's something that Delaware has kind of bought into. You're in a great city where everyone that is on campus will probably go to the game because that's what you do when you're in Newark, Delaware. We don't experience that here in Murfreesboro, so we don't get those type of crowds. So I expect it to be a ruckus crowd nonetheless. I like Delaware to cover the 10.5 in this one. Actually, when I'm looking at the spread here, I pictured it at 31-17. That is the under. When I looked at 55.5, I thought that's way too high because MTSU hasn't proven that they can score. And even for that matter, Delaware hasn't necessarily proven that they can score at that clip either. So 55.5. Now, if this becomes a back and forth game, by all means, obviously it does get to 55.5, but I like Delaware at home. I like this as you put it, a get right game for them to kind of correct those wrongs they had with Jacksonville State. MTSU not known for turning the ball over a lot, which is obviously what is hamstring the Blue Hens a lot this year. I just think a lot of the signs point to Delaware winning. And again, I bring it back to the point that MTSU, instead of finding ways to win, have been finding ways to lose. And so a key part, I know I've already made them my keys to the game, but if they can create pressure and get a fast start or even stay in the game in the first half, obviously the outlook is totally different. But until I can be proven otherwise, I will obviously continue to pick against MTSU. But this is really the first time I've picked them to lose by multiple possessions going all the way back to the Wisconsin game. So I like Delaware's offense. I think, and maybe I should take some more credence into what you're saying, Dan, as someone who's seen more Delaware football. But I think the Jacksonville State game was just a bad situation for Delaware. I think they ran into a Jack State team who was destined for greatness that night. They ran the football at will. They looked almost like an Army-type team where they knew they were going to run it, and they just did it. And Cam Cook doesn't need to be in Conference USA, but here he is, and he's going to win the MVP, and we all know this. So I just think it was a bad recipe for Delaware. So I'm not sold that Delaware is as bad as they put on display against Jacksonville State. I think Delaware gets out hot. I think they hold it there. 31-17 is my final. But Dan, if any of your Delaware crossover listeners are here, MTSU under has been feeding families this year. So if you are a gambler, take MTSU and the unders. I like the under 55.5 in this one. But let's wrap it up, Dan, man. I appreciate you. And, of course, Bryce, who's not with us today, but he's your co-host over at Feather and Field Goals. You guys do great coverage for Delaware. Basketball season's right around the corner. I know you are just as excited for it as I am. I know Bryce is definitely excited about it, as he's the big basketball guy for you guys. But, Dan, real quickly, before we hang this one up, tell me where we can find you guys on social media and, of course, your uploads that you do throughout the football season.
Well, thanks, Jake, for that very much. Feathersandfieldgoals.com, spelling out the A-N-D, feathersandfieldgoals.com. We're pushing that this season, our first season, with our own website that we can call our own, podcast links available there, links to YouTube channel, written articles by Bryce that have been really great. And I need to certainly dabble in, and I'll add my own hat in the ring there along the way with written content at our website, Feathers and Field Goals. Feathers FG's pod will be the social handle as well. Search us up, IG, Twitter, things like that. So thanks, Jake. That's kind of where we're putting our stuff these days, and just trying to keep up with the rest of the great work across the roundtable. It's been an honor and privilege to represent Delaware in a sense in that group with a bunch of people very dedicated to all their programs that they follow and watch.
Thanks again to Dan for taking the time to join us. I'm grateful for what they provide to the Conference USA Roundtable. As he said there, if you're not already following us on socials, at Blue Raider Pod, at TikTok, Instagram, and X/Twitter. And of course, if you're listening to us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss another one of our uploads. The CUSA midweek schedule is continuing to have its burden here for us here at the BRP. So look for our Friday episode this week to be our preview of next week's midweek game against Jacksonville State, where Shane Pickering will be joining us once again as we are back home. So we'll be back to our normal schedule very soon, but keep your eyes peeled for Friday. And so you don't miss it, you need to be following us on social media. But thanks again to you, the listener, for tuning in. And until next time, go Blue.